My sister and I are dealing with a thorny situation concerning our father's inheritance. My grandparents had two kids, my dad and my aunt, who were meant to each get 50% of a few properties they owned when they died. Grandpa died more than 20 years ago, and my grandma kept everything until she died, about 4 years ago. My father apparently decided to renounce the inheritance in favor of my aunt, who had been the one to take care of Grandma when she was old. My sister and I had much less of a relationship with her, as we grew up on the opposite side of the country. However, my dad could not simply renounce his half, because it would just pass on to us. He told us he had a huge debt with the bank, and he would renounce because otherwise they would take his 50%, and urged us to also renounce in favor of our aunt, so at least she could enjoy the whole inheritance. We believed him, renounced, and moved on. About 2 years later, our dad died, and because he had supposedly died in debt, we didn't claim his inheritance. Fast forward another 2 years, and here comes the plot twist. Apparently, when we renounced, we only actually did so for our grandparents' side of the inheritance, meaning we're still entitled to 25% from our grandma. This was discovered by my aunt when she went to sell one of the properties, but couldn't, as we were still entitled to 25% of it. She called us and asked us to renounce the other 25% so she could sell. But my sister decided to check on our father's debt situation to see if we could at least get a portion of the sale. She requested reports on our father's debt situation, which showed no debt, not even a report from 10 years ago. We didn't know if the debt was a fabrication or maybe a much smaller or older debt that was forgiven. We had already thought it weird that when our dad died, no one had contacted us about the debt. We've decided to accept the remaining 25%, which includes part of an apartment, my aunt's current home and workplace, and 2 smaller properties. All in all, it's not a huge amount of money, probably about 20 to 30k euro each, but still significant. Having that money could be the difference between my struggling sister and her husband, plus 2 kids, being able to afford the down payment on a home, or renting forever. My aunt has, however, accused us of being horrible people, and of disrespecting my father's wishes that she keep the whole inheritance. I see my father's decision, however well-intentioned, as ultimately irresponsible towards his children. She has told us that having to sell those properties, or buy our share, would destroy her life and ruin her chances of having a retirement. She's in her late 50s now, as she's entitled to a small pension because of not having worked enough years throughout her life. However, she also owns 100% of another home that's outside the scope of the inheritance. Am I the a-hole? Edit. Seen some people assume that the reason for my aunt not working enough years to get a better pension was because she was taking care of Grandma. This is not the case. Grandma was never bedridden or otherwise disabled, and my aunt worked for the whole of the last 2 decades. Those years of unemployment happened when she was younger, and I wasn't even alive, so I don't know the circumstances. However, it is true that my grandma never fully mentally recovered from our grandpa's death, and it was mainly my aunt and my cousin who were able to keep her company throughout all that, whereas the rest of the family lived 12 hours away on the other side of the country. Not the a-hole. She's an a-hole for demanding full ownership of a second property to which she really wasn't entitled. It was your grandparents' original wish for it to be 50-50. How is it any more respectful for her to demand 100%? She already has 75. Yikes! Such people who throw around horrible people at those who don't just give them what they want. They are a-holes. Not the a-hole. I appreciate what your dad was trying to do with your aunt as a thank you for caring for their mother, but it isn't fair to you, really. If 40 to 60,000 euro is 25% of the sale, that should leave her with a pretty good chunk of cash. Between that and the other properties she has, that's all her own. She should be fine. Not the a-hole, but your dad was sneaky. If he wanted his sister to have inheritance due to taking care of parents, then he should have said so. He lied. Aunt is sneaky, knowing he lied, and is trying to accuse you both of deception. Dad was the a-hole, and Aunt is now the a-hole, for trying to strong-arm you both out of a small portion. My grandfather passed away about 1.5 years ago, and in the few years beforehand, he had quite a falling out with his children. There was a lot of infighting between them after my grandmother passed away a couple years before, and they argued a lot over money after this, and what they thought they were inheriting from her versus what they actually did. It got to the point where my grandfather modified his will to bypass his kids and leave his estate to his 14 grandchildren. So now we are finally at the point where the inheritance is being paid out. I think at least some of the grandchildren, my brother and sister included, are conflicted about receiving this inheritance and feel that we are obligated to give at least some of it to our parents. For some background, my parents are fairly well off and both retired and collecting pensions. They just recently purchased a second home in Florida, so they can do the snowbird thing. In other words, this is not money they need. Meanwhile, we are fairly early in our careers and in uncertain time, and to be honest, giving away this nest egg seems pretty stupid. I also feel there isn't really a right amount to give, and unless substantial, it is going to seem insulting. To my parents' credit, at no point have they asked us to give them any portion of this cash. So anyway, today my brother, who happened to also be executor and received a 6-figure commission on the inheritance. I think this is worth noting because as a result of the 14-way split, he received substantially more than anyone else. Reached out to ask us what the plan is to give my mom some sum of the money. My sister has a heart of gold and would probably pony up the whole amount if asked. Myself, I feel like I should not feel too guilty if I keep all of it and put towards my own retirement. But I am also aware greed can make people think some crazy ways, so I need some unbiased thoughts on this one. Reddit. Would I be the a-hole if I said I wanted to keep my entire inheritance? Update. For those who were wondering about my brother's commission, it seems legit. Basically, he gets a certain amount of the total inheritance for executing the will, which is considerable. It just turns out he is getting so much more because of the inheritance being split so many ways, while he still gets the full commission. Also, a lot of people made the point that I should just talk to my mom and ask what she wants. I think that is probably a good way to proceed, although I am not sure I will get a straight answer from her. A lot of people think I should choose this hill to die on. There is always the question of whether it is worth potentially alienating my family if my siblings proceed with giving the money and I do not, including running the risk of being written out of my parents' will also if they take it too harshly. I see it as a gamble. Not the a-hole. He wants your mom to have part of the inheritance. He can give her his commission. By the way, it seems ridiculous that from the sound of it, the commission is as much as or more than the inheritance portion. Not the a-hole. Your grandfather intentionally left you the money and not your parents. This was his decision. He wanted you to have it, not them. Also, you said your parents aren't exactly destitute. It's not like you're leaving them to starve. Plus, maybe this is just me, but I don't think parents should take money from their kids. Not the a-hole. Your brother would be the a-hole if he convinces your sister to cough up her inheritance. Your grandfather gave it to you, and not his kids for a reason. It's spitting on his memory to give the money to the people he intentionally didn't give it to. My husband and I have 3 children, Anna, 24, Jeff, 21, and Jed, 19. I adopted Anna a year after I got married. To avoid issues with my husband's family, only I adopted her and my husband did not. Jeff and Jed are our biological children. The 3 of them are close and get along very well. My husband comes from a well-off family, and a few months ago when his father died, he left trust funds amounting to, let's say $100,000 for each of his biological grandchildren, including Jeff and Jed, and $20,000 for Anna that they can access when they turn 30. It's my father-in-law's choice what to do with his money, and I'm just grateful for the gift he gave my daughter. But I also feel for her because she has a smaller nest egg compared to her brothers. I talked to my husband if we could set up a trust fund for Anna using our own money to help close the difference, but he said he is not sure if it's the right thing to do. To make it clear, my husband is Anna's father in every way except on paper. He loves her and has never treated her differently than our sons. However, he is concerned that Jeff and Jed might see this as us favoring Anna. I was planning to talk to our children about it so they would know, but my husband said that it didn't matter if we told them about it tomorrow or if they find out when they're 30. The point was that we still did not treat them equally. He said that his father's relationship with his grandchildren is his own, and our relationship with our children is our own. He thinks we should not try to make up for his father's decision to leave smaller inheritance to Anna at the cost of possibly making our sons feel that we favor their sister. I love all my children equally, but at the same time, I worry less for Jeff and Jed because they already have a comfortable amount of money from their grandfather's trusts. I only want my daughter's future to be as secure as her brother's. Not the a-hole. You said your husband views himself as and acts as Anna's father. Was father-in-law aware of how his son felt? If so, then you would be opening the trust fund to correct the a-hole decision that father-in-law made, and making it clear to your sons that in this family, adopted and biological children are treated the same. Not the a-hole. Your hubby's dad is an utter a-hole. Yeah, technically he can do what he wants with his money, but I have no patience for people who leave wills with surprises that are clearly going to create family conflict. Here's some cash and a lifetime supply of family drama. Think of me while you end up in a massive argument that tears the family in half. Rant over. How do your hubby and sons feel about affirmative action? Can you explain it from that framework, or will that make things worse? Because that's how I see this. You'd be discriminating against the boys in order to correct past discrimination against Anna. Not the a-hole. I can see where your husband is coming from. There's a certain logic to it. But in the end, making sure all your children have equal opportunities is not favoring one above the rest. When they're older, they should understand that. To me, it feels like while your husband's logic may make sense in this situation, because people can get a little jittery about money, the reasoning doesn't translate well to the other situations. If your father-in-law had paid for Jeff and Jed to go to private school, for instance, but only paid 1/3 of Anna's bill, would he want Anna to stay in public school while his sons got all the benefits of a private education? Or would he make up the difference so that Anna could go to private school too? I think he'd want to make up the difference in this situation because it's easier to see that the money directly equates to an imbalance in opportunities for his children. Your father-in-law's money was his to do with as he pleased, absolutely. But ensuring all your kids have equal resources and opportunity is not the same as favoring one of them. Background. My sister, G, is in college, and she's going to be done with her degree this spring. G had a nest egg that our family and friends had put aside for her studies, and that got used up very fast. She took out a student loan and used that up too. Eventually, my dad took out a personal loan in his own name so that G could continue her studies. It's worth noting that G has a spending problem. If she has money, she's compelled to spend it, often on trivial things like fashion or her expensive hobbies, and she has spent a lot. She used to work so that she wouldn't be using student loan money for her hobbies and fun purchases. But as I understand it, it's very hard to find a part-time job where she is. By now, between the student loan, co-signed by my dad, and the money she owes my dad, she's in a lot of debt. It's a really big financial burden for my dad, and he's reaching a point where he just can't take out any more loans, especially not on her behalf. He's let her know, in no uncertain terms, that once the money from his personal loan runs out in a couple of months, she will have to find another way to fund her life and studies. He really doesn't mean to cut her off. He simply can't afford to pay her way anymore, and she's known this was coming for at least a year. She's looking for work, but hasn't found anything yet. None of us, least of all G herself, have any idea where the money for the final stretch of her education is going to come from. She's not actually missing that much money, and she could easily survive until graduation if she found a minimum wage part-time job. But I'm not sure she understands the urgency of the situation. We live on opposite sides of our country and don't talk as much as I'd like, so I don't know how serious she's taking her job hunt either. The current dilemma. My dad was venting about all this to my grandma, who unexpectedly mentioned that, in light of our financial troubles, she wouldn't mind advancing G the graduation gift she had planned on giving her. Money that would be enough to keep her housed and fed until her studies are over. She is aware of G's irresponsible spending habits and has said that she would give the money to my father to dole out to G as needed. This is very generous on my grandma's part and would save my father and G a great deal of stress. But my father and I haven't told G about this, because this miraculous solution is exactly what she seems to have been waiting for all along. Don't get me wrong, I don't want my sister to starve. But my father was really hoping that running out of his money and having to find solutions or face the consequences would help her become more mature and fiscally responsible. So would we be the a-holes for accepting this money meant for my sister and keeping it hidden so that she at least tries to find a way to fund her own studies by herself? Not the a-hole. In fact, I would encourage it. Grandma is aware of the solution and consented, and ultimately it is Grandma's money and her decision, and she left the decision-making up to your dad. Not the a-hole. I suggest your dad pay the tuition directly so she can finish schooling and let her know she is welcome to the rest of it once she has an actual job. As for funding her housing and food, she's going to have to budget what she's got. Not the a-hole. It feels like if your sister is bailed out at this stage, she won't ever learn. Your father really has done a lot for her, and it isn't unreasonable to want her to at least attempt to pay for some of this herself. My husband and I have been married for 8 years. A few years ago, we bought an investment property in a nice area that we rent out. It was split 4 ways. A quarter each, me, my husband, my father-in-law, and my brother-in-law. We bought it for $380K. It's worth about $800 to $900K now. My brother-in-law is getting married, and he and his wife want to move into our investment property and pay well below market value rent. Our current tenants pay rent in a way that we don't pay anything out of pocket, and each get an extra $600-ish a month profit to split 4 ways. I don't feel comfortable with him moving in, and I feel cheap and like an a-hole because that means I won't have the extra $150 a month profit for myself. I told my husband privately that if anything happened between them, she would be entitled to a portion of the house. Also, a-hole of me because I wish them the best, but you can't tell the future. I'm also not familiar with how courts decide that kind of property split after divorce, so if anyone can please enlighten me. Husband and father-in-law say that family helps family, and brother-in-law needs to set up his family. As much as I love them, I bought the house to help with my retirement and to have a nice nest egg for my future kids. If brother-in-law keeps the house, never sells, it's not an investment anymore. I also know that there's no way brother-in-law can afford an $800,000 house on his own. I'm sorry, the housing market is just nuts now. Would I be the a-hole if I asked them to buy my portion out? I'm scared this will cause a rift in my marriage over money, but I think they're being unreasonable with an investment I was also a part of. I should be seeing a huge return on my investment by now. Edit to say, someone said they could buy something with the profit, but with a take-home of less than $200K. Sure, they might be able to buy something new, but they don't make enough to maintain a big house. They'd barely be paying the mortgage, and I don't know what they will do with the electric and gas bills. They never lived on their own and don't have stable careers yet. Not the a-hole. Appreciate family helps family, but as a quarter-part owner, you can already see scenarios where you lose out on income. If hub and father-in-law are okay with no income, doesn't mean to say you have to be. Brother-in-law should pay the same as previous renters, but deduct his quarter share. That way, everything stays the same. The big issue here is, yes, brother-in-law may want to set up his family, but starting out in an $800,000 house that you only own 25% is one heck of a leg up on everyone. Why does he have to move in? Just so he can say, look at my $800,000 house? Also, get a lawyer to write something up to protect the rest of you investors. Your brother-in-law assumed that you and your husband will collectively give him almost $500,000 as a wedding gift? That's not just helping out. That's tossing him your future. Sounds like he needs to explain to his new wife that he doesn't have as much money as he portrayed himself to have, and he needs to look for a starter home. Not the a-hole. Not the a-hole. Get a formal, legal contract stating what happens in the event of divorce if you let them move in. As far as letting them move in, they need to continue to make sure you, your husband, and father-in-law keep getting paid the same. Update. I spoke to my husband. I said I don't feel comfortable with brother-in-law moving in and paying below market rate. I said I got it as an investment because I knew I'd be making some good money in a few years, and getting an extra $1,800 a year is nice. Helps me offset some of my costs, allows us to splurge and save. I also said that if they will go ahead and let brother-in-law move in, then they need to buy me out of my investment because it's not what I signed up for, and don't want this feeling to fester and ruin our relationship. That they're kids and can't realistically maintain such a high monthly cost. And what will he do if he can't make payments? I don't want to be liable for that headache and stress over payments. Dear husband will talk to his family members about this and draw papers to buy me out. If dear husband wants to subsidize his brother's life, that's his family and life, and I won't interfere. But I won't do it. I will talk to a lawyer and real estate agent too, just to figure out how I can get my fair share.